Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining the APG seminar series. And we've got the first of two Nottingham guys. I'd forgotten actually, we've got Malcolm Bennett of Nottingham was on the 9th of March. So more by luck than construction, I think, having them back to back. But anyway, this is quite an exciting one for the APGC because we've been in discussions with Tony for a long time about phenotyping. And we're going to realise he's going to tell you about what he's doing today. So a bit of background. Tony's Professor and Associate Head of School at the School for Computer Science at the University of Nottingham, with a background things like computer vision. And for the last, 15 years, he's been looking at development and deployment of image-based plant phenomic technologies. We need to get better language for this area. Right, mouthful. I'm not going to scoop up more of your time, so I want to actually hear what Tony's going to talk about, and he's going to tell you all about the PhenomUK-RI program that's starting up. And this is very much an area that the APGC wants to conjoin with, work with, partner up with, and develop things going forward. It's an expanding area globally, and I think we want to be at the forefront of science in this area. So, Tony, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Right, thank you. So, as Derek says, I'm a computer scientist by training. My background is in computer vision and image analysis. And about 15 or 16 years ago, the famous Malcolm Bennett, who you're having come to talk in a little while, asked me if I could help him with a picture that he was having trouble with. And he had some images of Arabidopsis roots that he wanted analysing. And I ended up writing, I think, about 2/3 of a page in a 30-page bid for a systems biology centre that then took off and completely dominated my life. So for a long time now, I've been working on computer vision methods for analysing images of plants. And we've done a lot of stuff with roots because we started with Malcolm. We got into using X-ray to look at roots in soil. We've done some 3D reconstruction of shoots. And we've done some feature detection and so on. And there's now a bunch of us at Nottingham, particularly Andy French, Mike Pound, Valerio Gafrida's joining us soon, who develop phenotyping technologies and tools, from a computer vision point of view. We don't have a particular interest in any plants or crop species or age or disease or anything. Mike Pound likes to do a talk where he says, this is a maize plant, this is a wheat plant, this is an IKEA plant, and see if anybody notices the switch. We're into the technology. As a result of being into the technology, I've gradually got pulled into, if you like, the higher level aspects of it. Now, how do you tie these tools together and make a working infrastructure that people can use? We've always released our tools. So from 10, 12 years ago, we were releasing bits of software that would allow people to download the kit and analyze their own images using our thing. And we've always given it away. So we've always been interested in having stuff used. But after a while, you get interested in the larger scale things, right? So instead of one piece of software, how does the Hounsfield facility work? Then how does the Hounsfield facility work with the other stuff that we've got? So the root and shoot stuff, how does this all tie together? And through a series of European projects, along with Malcolm in some of them, I got pulled into building plant phenotyping infrastructures. So what I'm going to do today is kind of tell you the story. I think a lot of people know that we have a large grant from the UK Infrastructure Fund to look at a research infrastructure for plant phenotyping, but there's quite a lot of background behind it that I think, because it's been buried in particular projects, perhaps isn't so well known. So I'm going to run through the story and tell you what we're up to at the moment. So I think you all know why we're doing this. We need huge improvements in food production quickly as we can to deal with climate change, the growing population, and so on. And biologists have a lot of tools for doing clever things with the genome, and breeders too. So you can affect the genome by using genetic modification techniques if you want to, or it's classic breeding and breeding for particular traits. But it's phenotyping that's the problem. If you don't have similar data on the plant phenome, on its structure and function, then how do you tie that to, you can't make best use of the genetic data you've got. You need to be able to tie them together. So phenotyping has been growing for quite a long time, and it involves all sorts of people, plant, agricultural scientists, engineers, computer science, mathematicians, and so on. And we're basically in the business of tying together a number of things, of pointing sensors at the plants in whatever environment we want to, pulling out some traits, looking at them, analyzing them, and getting biological knowledge. The goal of this is biological knowledge, okay? So all the stuff that I'm doing, I'm a computer scientist, right? And we're interested in building tools and infrastructures, but we want those tools and infrastructures to lead to biological knowledge and to support research. So that's where we're coming from. This is a slide that was put together 4 or 5 years ago now by Rick van der Zedde at Wageningen, and he'd done some searches for the number of papers arising that had plant phenotyping in. Right? And you see a very, very marked expansion in the number of publications arising as you go back over the years, shooting up fairly well. And now we have journals dedicated specifically to it. Right? So a lot of people have been getting into this in a lot of different ways certainly over the past 20 years. The emphasis body that I'm going to talk about a little bit, European research infrastructure that's under development, started quite a while ago and did a survey in 2017 of phenotyping installations, and they found 31 around the world. Okay? I'm sure they missed some, but I'm sure they didn't miss hundreds and hundreds. But they found 30 odd. Yeah? This is a snapshot I took this morning of an infrastructure map that's on the Emphasis website. So this is an interactive map that shows just Europe. It shows just the countries that are involved in the Emphasis project and in developing the Emphasis infrastructure. And this is interactive. So if this were live, you could click on each of those things and get some information about them. So one thing you see is there's a whole load of different things involved. So there are field places, there are controlled environment installations, there are people who are making data and data analysis services available. There are some field sites. The difference between field installation and field site is a field installation is something like the Rothamsted gantry that's fixed in place, and a field site is somewhere where you can take portable equipment and work on it. And they have people doing higher level modeling analysis of the data to generate the biology. As of this morning, there were 202 entries in the database just in Europe. So this really has grown. There's a lot of people out there doing phenotyping. They're doing it for all sorts of different reasons. There's different types of phenotyping. So high precision phenotyping, you want really detailed descriptions of the data. So things like confocal microscopes, laser ablation tomography, things that really give you very high accuracy, very detailed stuff are out there. There are things that do high throughput that will give you much cruder information about many, many more plants much quicker. So maybe you want something that will just fly over your field and give you the average height of a plot. There are people looking at yield, disease, stress, all sorts of things. So they've got different goals. They work over different scales. One of the things that keeps on coming up is, wouldn't it be nice if we could tie these together? If we could take information from a controlled environment, phenotyping equipment that was making measurements of plant organs, leaves or whatever, and then tie this to field level stuff. That would be nice. Kind of hard to do, partly because it's just hard to do, and partly because the equipment is often not integrated properly, which is one of the reasons for doing what we're doing. And people work in different environments, growth rooms, glass houses, fields. There's a number of random pictures down the side of the Jülich risotrons at the bottom, Rothamsted's gantry, our Hounsfield facility at Nottingham, and I think the table thing is from France, but I forget where I stole that from. So there's all sorts of different goals, different scales people are working at. They're working in different environments, different species. If you can think of something that grows, somebody has pointed a camera or a sensor at it at some point. So one reason that there are all these things is there's no magic bullet, there's no single solution. The other reason is perhaps talked about a bit less, and that's that a lot of these things are developed for a particular project or a series of projects, right? And they're developed in isolation. So Nottingham makes a lot of noise about our Hounsfield facility, and it's really quite good. It was built because we had a series of grants, the largest one being Malcolm Bennett's ERC project, that were looking at very specific things. So we built it to do a job, yeah. And when we'd finished building it, it did that job. And then we stood back and said, okay, what do we do with it now? And we're not alone in this, right? It's in the nature of the UK funding environment that this is how you get equipment and facilities. Yeah? You get it competitively, and you get it targeted at a particular thing. Yeah? And it's true more or less across Europe. Yeah, a lot of these things have built bottom up, piecemeal, and there's a load of distributed stuff out there that no one's ever really thought about how you tie it together. You get the occasional counterexample springing up now. So at Wageningen, they've recently opened a thing called NPEC, which is a national phenotyping facility that has really nice controlled environment rooms, glass houses and fields with robots and so on in, all on the same site. And they've spent about 25 million euros on it. Yeah? But that's quite rare. Pretty much everywhere else, things are developed in a fragmented and piecemeal way, and that's perhaps not great for this community. So the reaction to this over the past 10 or so years has been to try to build a community around it, to try to tie these things together and work bottom up. Right? So there's a whole load of national plant phenotyping networks have appeared. These are the ones that I could find most recently. There's a Nordic one as well. There's a variety of others across Asia. Yeah? All of these trying to do the same kind of thing, to bring people together and share information and knowledge about what they've got. Okay, so in the middle of this, or at the right-hand side, is the first UK plant phenomics network, which we had 100 grand from BBSRC. Must be getting on for 10 years ago now. Yeah? And we hadn't noticed at the time that our branding was the same as the Muppets movie, but we've changed it now. There are some larger things. Yeah? There's a North American one, there's a Latin American one, and the one that I'm going to talk about the most is the European one. So this is slightly different. All these things began by trying to build a community, share information, and so on. Yeah? The EPPN one was different in that it had a goal in mind. Right? It was started by a guy called Uli Schor at Jülich in Germany, you may have heard of. And Uli's plan was always to follow a track. Right? So in European funding, there's a recognized series of grants that you can apply for. You can apply for a starting community grant to build your community, and then there's an advanced community, and then this free project that takes you into a research infrastructure. Right? And this is where we've been traveling for the past 10 years. Right? There is also an international plant phenotyping network, again started by Uli, and this tries to tie the other things together and sit on top of it. Yeah? And this really is just, it's a network. It runs lots of webinars, and it runs the IPPS, the International Plant Phenotyping Symposium. So there's a whole lot of things out there that have gradually grown up from local people in different countries, yeah, all at the same time, because they all have the same problem, and have gradually tied together. Yeah? And I think the European thing is different because of the planned development of it was different. Okay. So I'll focus now for a bit on what happened in Europe. So as I said, we started with a networking project, a starting community project they're called, EPPN, in 2012. And what EPPN did was a mixture. It had a couple of million euros. About half of that was spent on transnational access. So the idea of this is we find out what equipment and facilities people have got across the partner countries, and we provide money through the project to allow people to travel to other countries and do experiments. So in EPPN, there were 23 facilities recognized in those countries in green. And what you could do was put in a small bid to the EPPN project, a couple of pages. It would be tested to see whether it was feasible. And if it was and it was accepted, then the project would pay for you to go to a different country and do your experiment and get the data out of it. Okay? So we had 23 tools across 7 institutions, and we did 66 experiments in the first thing. Yeah, so it's the first go. There was other stuff in it. There was a bit of research into methods, into data infrastructure. So the beginnings of looking at the stuff that you need if you're doing this, if you like, more professionally. But the focus of it really was on this transnational access and can we build a community that would do it. If a starting community project is considered to be successful, which this one was, and I should say in the UK, Nottingham were involved and Aberystwyth were involved. I'm not sure that anybody else was in that first one. If a starting community project is considered to be success, then you have the chance to apply like a game show for an advanced community project. And so effectively a call went out that said, we want to do an advanced community project in plant phenotyping. To be eligible, you pretty much have to have been EPPN. And that started in 2017. And this followed the same kind of pattern. Right? A lot of the money was for more transnational access. Yeah? And you can see the numbers here. We had this time capacity for 160 to 200 experiments. And there was a background thing of the same sort of topics around data integration, experimental design across sites, and so on. This was a little bit more serious, right? So in this one, we had to put in criteria for, if you like, membership. Right? So the first EPPN, no one had heard of it. Uli rang a bunch of people that he knew and said, do you want to be part of my project? It was like a classic project startup. For EPPN 2020, the 66 people who'd done experiments were aware of it, and a lot of them wanted to be a part of the follow-on. Yeah. So then they had to start thinking a bit more detail about what it meant to be part of this sort of network infrastructure. Yeah, it was taking a step away from a network and starting to be a little bit more of an infrastructure. So there were basic requirements about gathering metadata and providing the data you provide as the output from experiments and so on. Yeah, very light touch stuff, but it was a slightly different thing. Okay? And the research part of it, if you like, around imaging methods and data stuff, was building on the previous one, and it was starting to get a little bit bigger, a little bit broader, and a little bit more focused, if you like, in some senses. Okay, so EPPN ran till 2016. EPPN 2020 was supposed to run till 2020. In the end, it was extended because of the pandemic till 2021, but they were fine. The intention when you enter this program in the EU is that when you write your bid for your advanced community project, one of the questions is, and how will you become sustainable afterwards, self-sustainable? And everybody's answer to this is, we'll apply to go on the ES3 roadmap. So the ES3 roadmap is a European scientific forum for research infrastructures, and it funds large-scale infrastructure projects across Europe. Right? So big telescopes, that kind of thing. I did an underwater telescope recently, and it still does my head in. But those kinds of things that no single country would either be able to afford or would be prepared to spend all the money for because they don't need it very often. Yeah? So shared research infrastructure. Okay? And we were very lucky in that because of the way the timing lined up with the different calls, we got a chance to bid to put the EPPN development onto the ES3 roadmap earlier than we might have done. Right? A chance only comes up every 5 years. Okay, So we thought that we would do this, and we would then be going to making a bid for the larger project and getting on this roadmap around about now, basically. But there were some delays and whatever in Europe, and we got a chance to go for it in 2016, and were honestly perhaps a little surprised that we did, because we weren't that very far into EPPN 2020. So what this basically means is we got funding through a project initially called Emphasis Prep to start to take EPPN and all those people and all that equipment and the work that we've done and turn it into a proper research infrastructure. So this is a fairly dense slide, but this is these are the goals of the Emphasis Prep project. The way these things work is you have funding for the preparatory phase, usually sort of 4 or 5 years, as an EU project. At the end of that EU project, countries, member states, have to decide if they're interested in carrying on with it. And at that point, the governments have to put money in themselves, right? So it doesn't come through the Commission, through a research thing. Individual countries have to decide they're going to pay for their own stuff, okay? And it falls out of the normal European stuff, okay? So the Emphasis Prep project, we set out to make a pan-European network of phenotyping platforms, so like EPPN 2020, stuff that was useful and provided useful data and provide community access to them. Okay. We also said we would try to build a European level data management system, okay, so that people could share data across sites. Okay. This is obviously quite difficult. A number of solutions came out. And there are a lot of shared tools now being used. There perhaps isn't a European level single data management system, but there's a lot more uniformity than there was back then. And we would develop some new technologies. Yeah, so we looked at things like using robot arms to guide cameras around the plants so that they were making the same measurements of the plant rather than taking images from the same point. We tried to make things a little bit more intelligent in that sense, and there were a number of things around environmental monitoring technologies as well. So these were the goals of Emphasis, and as I say, the first thing is an Emphasis Prep, which is a 4-year European project, and at the end of it, around about 2021, we had to turn it into the implementation phase where countries decide whether they want to be part of it. Okay. Throughout this, the UK has been very, very keen. So to get onto the roadmap in the first place, you need 4 countries, not institutions, countries, to agree to it. And the initial 4 were France, Germany, Belgium, and the UK. And BBSRC and BEIS have been our partners in this all the way through. Okay. So we've had national support to do this. Yeah, for the preparatory project, I was going to say they largely left us on their own, but they didn't. They were BBSRC representatives involved all the way through the Emphasis Prep project, and they led a work package on the legal and governance side of it. So we've actually had more involvement in Emphasis from the beginning than pretty much any other country. So what Emphasis tries to do is go through these phases. Yeah, the preparatory phase, you figure out what you want. The implementation phase, which is where we are now, you pilot it, you build various bits and pieces, and the operational phase is when you turn it on and it becomes a separate institution that people can access, and there's funding models and agreements and so on. Okay. Emphasis Prep was the EU project that allowed us to do the design. We were severely damaged by the pandemic, and so the European Commission very kindly gave us some extra money last year. And we have a new project called Emphasis Go, which is intended to take us through the implementation phase into operation. And the current plan is that if all goes well, Emphasis in some form will become operational in spring of 2025, okay, which lines up nicely with the UK thing I'm going to talk about in a minute or two. What the idea of this is it will be, there'll be like a central hub statutory seat is the phrase. It looks like that's going to be in Belgium at the moment. And then there will be a number of national nodes. And the idea is that those national nodes will be providing services both within their own country, yeah, and they'll be providing services to the international emphasis and, if you like, taking services from them. So there'll be a link into other things. Yeah. Sorry, something's pinging. Yeah. It's going to cover all these things you can see down the right-hand side, the things that you saw on the emphasis map earlier. Yeah, so they want to have facilities in controlled environments, lean fields, which are things where you can move stuff around, intensive fields, which are fields in which you have fixed high quality things, modeling and data services. Yeah. It's going to be arranged around 4 functional units. Right? So there'll be a directorate which will handle access to things and communication and so on. There'll be a data management and modeling unit which will handle data standards, tools and so on for sharing data and managing data. Advancing phenotyping practice is about pushing forward the technologies and so on that people use, and training and education probably speaks to itself. Yeah. At the moment, we don't know where these things will go. Okay, there's still a lot of work to be done. We're a couple of years from it going live. We now have 11 countries signed up to it. And there's a thing called the Interim General Assembly, which is putting it together and trying to sort these things out. The IGA has 2 representatives for every country that's signed up. One is the scientific representative, which for the UK is me, supported by Darren Wells, who some of you might know. And our official national representative is Rowan McKibben from BBSRC. So we are working quite closely with BBSRC in doing this, and they're committed, and Rowan's pushing them really hard. In terms of these 4 functional units, we would like, and when I say we, I mean BBSRC, BAYS, yeah, have decided that the Advancing Phenotyping Practice unit is the one that we would like to lead if we're going to lead anything. Yeah, but we want to hand in all of it if we possibly can. Yeah? So emphasis is trundling on. These things obviously take time. There's an awful lot of meetings and very long documents, but this is the bare bones of emphasis. So all that's been going on since 2012. And I think people have become more aware of it recently. Emphasis appeared in quite a few of the BBSRC strategy documents as a priority for them. They are engaging with it and so on. In the UK, what they've done in practice to help us get into it is 4 years ago, we got the chance to apply for a technology touching life network, and I think a lot of you will have heard of PhenomUK. And the idea of this was the UK preparing for emphasis. It was a funding call that was across all the research councils. It happened to come at the right time, and BBSRC basically said, look, if you bid for a phenotyping network and it's good enough and you get over the line, that would be great because it would help us build into emphasis. Okay. So this is a slide I've used a lot. I'm sure some of you have seen it. The idea of it was that it had to bring people from the engineering and physical sciences together with people from the life sciences to build technologies that would improve basic discovery. Okay. Our website for the network is still up. The network grant ends at the end of March, and phenomuk.net is there, and you can see some of the things that we've done. We organised a bunch of different workshops and visits and so on. Obviously the pandemic didn't help, but we still did quite a lot. And the biggest thing that we did was we funded in total 11 pilot projects. So we had people submit short proposals, and we gave them up to about 25 grand to test out different technologies in different environments. So we have funded, out of that 500k, a little over half was spent on real projects proposed by the community. So that brings us to where we are now. Okay? So it was always intended that the PhenomUK network would, in some sense, transition, grow, or whatever, feed into a national node of emphasis. Right? We've been doing this, if you like, top down and bottom up. We've been working with emphasis to define what emphasis is and say there's going to be national nodes, and then the PhenomUK funding was intended to try and grow a community around phenotyping and build what a UK node should look like. Yeah? So that's where we are at the moment, and this is the point of contact. Okay? So about early spring 2021. BBSRC put a proposal to the UK Infrastructure Fund for a scoping project. And the idea of this is that it's a scoping project. Yeah? It's intended to allow people to design and pilot research infrastructures that they would like to have built as national facilities. And the idea is that if you can win a scoping project and you can use that scoping project to produce a proposal and a business plan for the infrastructure that you want, you can then bid with BBSRC to UK-RI for a full infrastructure project. And if you look on the website, you'll see that most of those are in the region of 40 to 50 million pounds, I believe. London's got a lot of money for some genetic stuff recently. You can see some examples on the BBSRC website of what they do. So this is an unusual thing, right? In that the proposal was made by BBSRC to UK-RI. Okay, some of us in emphasis might have seen it and had a little bit of input to it, but it was a proposal from BBSRC. So this text in grey here is from the BBSRC proposal, and they initially called it UK PCPI for the UK plant and crop phenotyping infrastructure. And they told UK-RI it would be distributed with regional sites and nodes, sort of carrying on from the emphasis idea. Yeah? A lot of emphasis on new ways of working. Yeah? So we want to be sharing our equipment, sharing our data, in the hope that this speeds up the way that the science gets done. Yeah? Make it easier for people to collaborate and create synergies and so on. Yeah. So this was the goal of the project as defined by BBSRC with some input from emphasis and so on. Okay. Again, the grey stuff here is from that proposal. They want there to be 3 focus areas. One is to look at facilities access. So one of the frustrating things about the EPPN thing was, although some UK people went to Europe and some Europeans came to the UK, the nature of European funding is that you cannot go to your own country. So we couldn't use that money to collaborate within the UK, which was kind of frustrating. So the first part of this is kind of setting up a national capability, if you like. Can we come up with a mechanism that will allow people to share equipment in the UK and do what we did in EPPN? Okay. So that covers all aspects of this, right? So what's the funding going to be like? What does it really cost? Okay, we're making a business plan in this project, right? So we need to know what staff is needed to allow people to use these bits of equipment in a reliable way. What bits of equipment do we need? Right? Do we need more field stuff? Do we need more controlled environment stuff? Have we got enough? Is it all in the north of England and we need some in the south, or vice versa? Okay, so there's quite a lot behind that. Okay, there's what kind of facilities do we need in the UK and how are we going to use them? What will it cost? All right. Point 2 is digital infrastructure. So how are we going to tie our data together? Yeah. How are we going to provide fair data access? Fair is a familiar term to lots of people, but maybe not everybody. So fair is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So can I, if I'm looking for a piece of data on my favorite plant, do I know where it is? If I know it's there, can I actually get hold of it? Is it in a form that will work with my stuff, and can I use it for something else afterwards? Okay. And point 3 is kind of carrying on the work of PhenomUK, right? So coordinate the community, prepare for an emphasis node. So this was announced in June last year. We ran a workshop in Nottingham in September. It was a workshop where we issued a general call, the BBSRC issued a general call for expressions of interest. We had to limit the numbers just to make it practical, and we didn't want there to be 12 people from one institution and 2 from another, it was kind of, you know, and we wanted the disciplines to be represented. So something like 55 people expressed interest, and we selected from them to have 33 people there to cover everything that we thought, and we had a follow-up online meeting for everybody who didn't get there. Right, it was unfortunate, but we had to do it, and it was something done with BBSRC. And at the end of it, people were invited to volunteer for roles in this new project. I had a small spasm and said I would be willing to lead it, and the people on this list, I'm sure you know at least most of them, volunteered to run a strand, a part of it. So this is a team that we put together. The idea is we have this management structure for it. Again, this was pretty much specified by BBSRC. There was some discussion at the workshop, but the idea is we have a management board which comprises the half dozen or so people who are running the project, if you like. We have a project advisory board that we're still appointing to. This is going to be people with experience of large-scale infrastructures, so things like elixir, bioimaging, those kinds of people would be involved in that, and national and international plant and crop scientists as well. Quite small, 4 to 6 people, we think. The participating institutes board is going to be somebody senior from each of the institutions who wants to be part of this, as you might guess from its name. We've currently got 18 institutions signed up. Okay? That's not closed. If there are anybody else who's willing to do it and to join, then that's fine. Your institute has already joined. The requirements are simply that they have some evidence of commitment to phenotyping, and they promise they'll carry on being committed to phenotyping for a little while. So we put a team together. Then things went a little bit quiet, right, which is a bit of a shame, or appeared to go quiet. So we had to submit a proposal to BBSRC in around mid-October. As I said, this was an unusual thing, right? This was BBSRC bidding to UK-RI for a project and then asking people to deliver it for them. So there were 3 levels rather than the usual 2, which put some complexity in. And UK-RI, there was some discussion about what the spending profile would be, shall we say. That took a little while. There's quite a lot of stuff to work out. BBSRC were great, but they haven't done one of these before. And so they were trying to do something unusual by being bound by their statutes. So my favorite one was we went through a process that ended with me being appointed to lead the project that involved people at the workshop discussing it and effectively voting. There was a request that went out through BBSRC for anybody else to put themselves forward. I submitted a CV and was kind of interviewed by Rowan and Richard Training fairly informally. And they announced on a Thursday afternoon that I was going to lead it. And then on a Monday morning, they advertised the funding opportunity because they were bound to by law. Right? So there were a number of things like that. It was a tricky one. We put a proposal in end of October. There was an international panel interview that I had to be grilled for on the 9th of December. They made some comments about you can do this better and that better and so on, which was good. I mean, they were people who have run large-scale infrastructures themselves. So senior people in Eurobioimaging and Elixir were on the panel. We addressed their comments, We got an offer letter at the end of January, and the project formally started on February the 13th. So it's been quite a lot of kind of behind the scenes stuff. This is the broad structure of it. The idea is that we're structured around 3 strands, as you'd expect, tied to the 3 things that BBSRC wanted us to do. We have a directorate that hopefully ties them all together. Yeah, and the goal is that we take the UK phenotyping community, we engage with the UK phenotyping community to design these 3 things, and then we feed them into emphasis. So this is a project that has a fair amount of money. At the moment, the only money that is committed is to staff, basically. All the people that you saw on that list have some time commitment. I have quite a lot of time commitment. We have a number of people. We have a project manager, who's Claire Hayes, who you might know from PhenomUK, and we have a number of research assistants who will be going out and doing the work. Okay, covers a comparatively small part of the money. Okay? The rest of it is stuff that we're going to decide on, hopefully with input from the community as the project progresses. So the bits in italics at the top of this is a broad overview of it. Each of our 3 strands is going to work on the same thing. Big buzzword for this from BBSRC is community co-design. Okay? So each of these 3 strands will begin with some community engagement. I've been looking at surveys that have been produced by the digital infrastructure people this morning. We're going to go out, run workshops, ask people questions, do visits to find out in each of these strands what people have got and what they want. We're going to run some workshops to design pilot activities. So this will be like the EPPN stuff. There will be some money that will allow people to that people in the community can bid for to go and try and use someone else's facility, yeah? Or to we're planning a number of data exemplars on the digital infrastructure strand, so people will be able to bid to take their data and someone else's data and combine it to achieve a goal. Okay? There's going to be a mixture on both of these of things which are completely bottom up. So what does the community want to do? Here's a fund. Ask for something to use someone else's equipment, because that will show us what demand there is for other equipment and so on. And some of them will be more targeted. Right? So we will hold workshops and decide maybe that tying this type of data to that type of data is something really important, so we ought to test it. Okay? We'll do that type of stuff. Now follow this thing. Community design, choose some pilots, do those pilots, and then assess them again across the community. I'm going to spend a lot of time, I think, communicating with people, okay, and making up for the fact that we were quiet for a couple of months because we weren't allowed to speak. These things are going to generate shortish action plans, and then the idea is at the end of it, in 2 years, we put it together and we put a business plan together, right, that will hopefully go to UK-RI and get us money for a full infrastructure. So these are quick things. I'm aware that I'm running out of time. These are quick things about what the 3 strands are going to be. Yeah. So access to facilities, mapping and gapping facilities, pilot mechanism. Yeah. The output of this is going to be strategic recommendations for what we should do. Yeah. So what equipment does the UK want? What does it cost? How do we handle the staffing and so on? That sort of stuff. Okay. For digital infrastructure, what data types are important to us? Okay? What data analysis tools are important to us? What hardware and software do we need to do it? Yeah. For networking and engagement, it will be more of the same as PhenomUK, but we need to focus on areas that PhenomUK hasn't finished work on. Right? So we're looking at key sectors, particularly technicians, technical professionals, early career researchers. Yeah? And we're going to try and prepare under that part of the project for the UK node of emphasis. And we have a specific goal of making a bid for the Advancing Phenotyping Practices functional unit. Yeah? And we'll build up the more general networking stuff. So hopefully before very long, you'll see an announcement for a national phenotyping conference to be held in the autumn. So I've talked rather longer than I thought I would. It's a surprising amount to say. So with that, I'm going to be quiet. I'm really interested in your questions, right? Because I'm not sure what people out there think of this. So I'll be quiet and answer any questions that you've got.
Thanks very much, Tony. Right, we've got one come in, I think. It's from Paul Shaw. Paul, do you want to just ask directly, or do you want me to?
So I'm going to stop sharing, I think, so I can see what's going on.
Are you there, Paul? So the question came in, but I don't know if you've disappeared. Well, I'll ask the question. Okay. So Paul was asking, wondered how you would address the issue of interoperability between platforms. So that takes you into standards and data exchange for data. I mean, that's always the fly in the ointment, I think, for any systems.
Yeah. So I think the starting point, and I would stress that it's the starting point, is things like there are a number of standards out there that are being adopted across Europe. So there's MyAPI, the minimum information about a plant phenotyping experiment. And there are tools like BRAPI, the Breeders API, that are being used. But we're going to start by looking at what people out there have got. One of the interesting things that we found was we had a talk that is available on the PhenomUK website from Sven Warris, who's a data lead for the Dutch NPEC problem. And Sven was great in that he just told us what he thought. And he basically said, yeah, there's good starting points, but they haven't found anything out there that they can just take off the shelf and use. So yeah, this is going to be the biggest part of the project, right? So we have a data scientist going to be employed on that, and 2 software engineers. It's being run by Sotos Saftaris, who you might know, who's done a lot of stuff on affordable phenotyping, but also does a lot of work with the medical data community and is used to big data systems. So Sotos and Valerio are going to address these issues, and hopefully we won't end up coming up with something completely new. I think we're very much in the mindset of that we want to take what's out there and tune it to suit the UK rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper. We're also working in contact with Elixir. So Elixir has a plant community that's doing a lot of work in these areas. Yeah. But yeah, this is the hard bit. At the end of the project, if we can come up with a way forward, that will be good. So we're not trying to build the infrastructure, we're trying to decide what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting that obviously I work a lot on mass spec stuff, and they kind of developed a translatable system that will take data from any system, convert it into the XLMS system. So that's the nirvana. But here, the phenotyping data is going to be so diverse.
Yeah,
that's where the difficulty lies. So you're comparing pictures to spectroscopy to, I don't know, hyperspectral images. It's just completely different approaches to data sets.
It is, and I mean, you can. So I think you can view it in 2 ways. You can either say, "Oh my God, it's impossible," or you can view it as actually anything we manage to do will be useful. But at some point we have to grasp the nettle and try to do it, right? Because at the moment you see it across the European phenotyping places a lot. There are people who are redoing experiments that have already been done because the data's in the wrong format, which is just crazy, you know? Yeah. So yeah, it's not easy. It's really not easy. And I'm not pretending for a second it is. So I've found the chat now.
Okay, so Raul, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I mean, he already replies. We are talking about the mapping and gapping UK facilities. I was wondering if that imply that voluntary distribution of the phenotyping capabilities, just to avoid redundancy.
Voluntary distribution. So I'm not quite.
Basically, is this platform is focused on that, this other is focused on something different. If you want to do something, go there or move your plans here.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent it will, right? So BBSRC so for a start, everything's voluntary, right? No one's being made to do part of this. There's a line in the BBSRC slide that says they want to make a cultural change, and the change that they really want to make is to break away from the idea that equipment funding, things like alert, is done in the same way as research grant funding. So the Haldane principle that the best science gets the money is great. Tying equipment purchases to that, which is what kind of happens, that's not so good. As a country, we end up with things that aren't, yeah. So what's important is not that I have an MRI scanner for plants, but that I can access one, right? So yeah, there will be a distribution of phenotyping capabilities to avoid redundancy is what they're looking for. I think, and I should be careful, I'm speaking for other people. My understanding is that we are much more likely as a community to get the funding for a large project if we demonstrate that voluntary thing. I think there might be a thing later on, if this is set up, where when they run things like alert, one of the questions is, okay, and how will it fit into this infrastructure, right? So they do want to take a national view, yeah.
So is it kind of taking the Science and Technology Funding Council approach, where they've got large resources that people can access to? Kind of follows that model, doesn't it?
It does.
So it's an easy push internally within UKRI. They're not reinventing their wheels. An interesting thing for that is that I'm old enough to remember the metabolomics devolved system one, Metro, I think it was called, and that didn't work. So we may have a talk offline about that one and identify areas where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think what it actually means is if you system like this, people actually really have to be open, because what you want to have is resources that are sweated 24/7, not 3 months out of 12.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. So I think a lot of this is actually about attitudes and and organization more as much as it is about technology. Yeah? So we need to make sure that everything that people have access to the stuff, but we also need to, if you like, make sure that the people whose equipment is put into this system don't pay a cost for it, if you like, in some sense, right? So we have the Hounsfield. From our point of view, it would be really good to get an income stream from other people coming and using it, and we've got one, and it's okay, but it could be better, right? Equally, we don't want the Hounsfield taken up by other people's work every day of the week, because we need to do it, right? So there has to be, in that strand, there has to be some conversations between facility managers and so on about, well, what are you prepared to put in? If you put it in, what would it really, really cost, right? So one thing I would stress is that BBSRC are really pushing for, we want to know the true cost of doing this, right?
Oh, that's good.
The last thing they want to do is to create, to put all these years of work into a UK node of emphasis and then have it fail because we can't, in the broadest sense, we can't afford to do it, right? If the Germans want to come and work in the Hounsfield and we say no because we can't fund it, that's bad. That's not on the table, right? Okay.
So I think we've got a question here. I don't know who the name is. It just says Smith J2. You got your hand up. There we go. You're on mute.
Hi. So it's Julian from Rothamsted Research. So,
hi, Julian.
Hi.
Hello.
So relatively new to Rothamsted. Just gone through the new strategic program development for the next 5 years, and you'll have to be careful because I don't know who's necessarily on the call here, but in that, which is a long process, Rothamsted, who have had these sort of national capabilities, which were things like the insect survey and Northwick and the long-term experiments, the BBSRC terminology now for Rothamsted is that the Institute is a national capability. We don't really know quite what that means, and as is JIC and as is ABBA or IBERS and so on, all those strategic institutes are now referred to as national capabilities. But if we look at the sort of capabilities that Rothamsted have, my position is that we'd love to have people come in and see those facilities as open access, and if they carry their salaries with them, that's great. But they have to support the overhead for that infrastructure. And it seems that universally people don't like to pay overheads, and fundamentally that's what makes institutes operate. And so whilst we can talk about national capabilities and shared access, open access, we have to recognize the overhead of that access as much as anything else in terms of how these things are financed. Just sort of a plea for the boring overhead to be covered.
So that my understanding is that is the intention of the research councils. And when I said it a couple of times, they want to know what it really costs, they're including that, right? The funding model for emphasis is still to be worked out in detail. There are 3 or 4 of them kicking around, but they all include things like contributions from the various countries, from various member countries. They include some idea that different sorts of people will have to pay for some of the services, right? So industrial partners will probably have to pay to use stuff. They're still working it out, but the phrase being used all the time is track costings, transparent costings. We have to tell BBSRC, and this is an opportunity to tell BBSRC and UK-RI what it really costs to run these, right? And what we need to be able to do it. So yeah, it's explicitly built in. Right? I can't promise they'll like the answer, right? But we get to answer that question.
Okay. Next question is from Ian Mill. Ian, do you want to raise your thoughts?
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question as just comments. I mean, I think you're aware of this, Tony, because you did actually provide us with a letter of support for another attempt to go to BBSRC Alert for further funding for this. But at JHI, we host what we call crop diversity HPC, which is shared computing storage infrastructure between, so this, ourselves, NIAB, the Natural History Museum, SRUC, Royal Botanics in Kew and in Edinburgh, and some of the people from St Andrews. So, from the computational side of things,
there are things, but there are things out there already. Okay, and the first thing that we'll do on each of these strands is go find out what's out there already and talk to the people who run it. So I hope when Sotos organises his first workshop that you'll be represented. Yeah, we're not trying to build necessarily something brand new, right? We don't want to start with a blank sheet of paper. I'm completely making this up as I sit here, right? So, but I can imagine not making it up as I sit here, but I'm thinking through it aloud. I can imagine a situation in which you have a conversation with Sotos and the other people around here around, well, is there any functionality that your crop diversity system can provide, right? That is acceptable for you to provide, and that would fit in. Are there aspects of your system that should be copied, right? Should we extend it, right? Or do we need something different for the phenotyping data? Yeah. So we're going to talk to as many people as possible, find out what they've got, what they're prepared to contribute, what works and what doesn't. Yeah. So I think I hope you'll be part of the discussion.
Okay, that's good to hear. I mean, it's not. Well, I'm not. Can I say, Derek? What do you want to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, we've actually got more money towards the large data infrastructure as well. So, and I suspect the game's evolving because I think all of a sudden, capital funding is becoming much more accessible. I think revenue is always the problem. I think we tend to realise that, but we've been pretty good at getting that. So a refresh on this might be useful, I think, as you say. So if those roadshows are picking that up, it's definitely something we'd want to chat about.
So I hope that this will the natural thing to think about are things like facilities, right, and hardware, right, because it's where all this begins. If this works and we can find a way of integrating whatever that means, right? So if we can get to a point where we can share data between these various things, right, and with the Europeans, right, I'm hoping this will produce an income stream for the various facilities. Yeah? It has to be managed, right? And it has to not overwhelm the work that people are already doing, and it has to work. But hopefully in a few years' time, it will become a lot more easy to maintain some of these structures. So I don't know about anybody else. The problem we have with Hounsfield is you can get money for capital, you can't get money to run it, as you say, right? Yeah. Right. One way to do that is to set up income streams with other users. The other thing that it's explicitly built into this is it's intended to be a business plan for something like 10 years. Right? So Emphasis is doing this as well. Emphasis is basically saying, yeah, kit has a lifetime and then it needs replacing. Right? So if we have a business plan for 10 years, maybe that includes that in 5 years' time, we expect we're going to have to put some new girders into the Rothamsted gantry, update the sensors on this piece of equipment, you know. So there is intended to be a longer life cycle component built into it.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe a final question. I mean, it's as described. It's an interesting, huge network, and I don't think anyone would ever want to go through that lifetime of construction again that it's taken to you to get to this stage. It's been a long-lived experience. If you look at the phenotype, also if you look at the phenotyping area at the moment, and you look outside academia, the field phenotyping area is going nuts in industry. So industry playing on this becomes interesting. And I was pleased to see that Dan Bandari from AHDB's here. And you can imagine the cereal industry clearly would have an interest in this. So how would you see them engaging in this, Tony?
Okay, so we have an explicit goal in the networking and engagement strand to engage with industry, because it's something that we didn't manage to do very much in PhenomUK. We started very much from an academic community. We tried to go out to industry and we had some success, but we were doing it kind of piecemeal, you know, alongside other things. The goal of this is to engage with as much industry as possible and find out what they want and have them as potential users and contributors. Right? This is we get all these different rules, right? So this is a BBSRC project. So during the project, we can't fund people working in industry, but we do want to talk to industry and have them tied to it. Yeah, and I would say as well, the field thing is a big issue. It's recognised in the research councils and in the PhenomUK group that the transition from lab to field is a big one.
And right on cue, Dan's come on.
Yes, well done for that beautiful timing. So we have just completed a questionnaire of mostly farmers and other levy payers regarding what they want to see in the AHDB recommended list. And one of the replies, there's been quite a lot of the respondents saying that they're interested in crop physiology and crop architecture. So it would seem that the farmers, you know, see that as something that's quite important. So you can see that there is, you know, a lot of demand for that sort of thing. Of course, the other industry would be the plant breeders, because you know they're carrying out a lot of trials. And it will be quite useful to have a uniform, standardized way of phenotyping. So I don't know how many plant breeders you might have in today's webinar, but I'm sure you probably have had conversations with them. Now, the other thing is commercial sensitivity. but it may be a way of opening that up. Yeah, so I can see all positives coming out of this.
Yeah.
Consider that a connection made then, and a useful one. And certainly for other crops, I mean, imagine all the potato guys we work with as well would still be interested. Obviously, there's no levy vote for that anymore, but there are maybe de facto ones being created. But they're all very, very much following a similar type of pattern that Dan's talking about, particularly in terms of climate change breeding for that, and field phenotyping is becoming a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the moment, I feel like I'm saying the same thing all the time because we're just getting going, right? We've had the grant for about 10 days, but yeah, we will be organising industrial workshops and so on with different sectors. So, I mean, drop me an email and I'll put you in touch with the people who in the group who are handling that kind of stuff.
Okay.
This is something that I find this is a big job, right? And we've got I think some decent people, and we've got quite a lot of time, and we've got some money. We're going to do our best to talk to everybody, yeah? And I appreciate that it's an unusual one, and there are lots of things about it that might make people uneasy. Yeah, about, are you going to be forced to share stuff? No, you're not. Are you going to get left out? I ideally hope not. There's all sorts of things around, I know, but hopefully if we talk to each other enough, we'll sort them out.
Perfect. That's a great way to end things. So I think we'll end it there then. I think we've grilled you enough, Tony. I think you've given lots of information of the potential coming up there. And most people take-home message has probably been something around 40 million to 50 million hanging around at the end, as most scientists hang on to. But the ability to develop new science, integrate it and translate it, I think is going to be really important going forward. So if everyone will just show your usual appreciation. So thanks very much, Tony, and we look forward to seeing you at one of these engagement meetings. And thanks, Dan.
So if anybody wants to talk about it or ask any questions, just I will stick. I should probably be wary of doing this. I'll probably get my inbox full or not. Okay.
Well, people don't get your email. We've got it anyway, so they can come to see me or Rob Hancock. But certainly chatting to the other levy boards and actually the agri-tech centres as well.
Yeah,
or maybe hang fire before they get merged.
Yeah,
and then just need to talk to one. Right. Okay. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you again at the next one. That's going to be Malcolm.